The early morning sun streams into Chris's house in Chicago, marking the start of another memorial gathering, the annual ritual where he tries to honor and remember the family he lost. All around him, the usual mess of daily life has been tucked away, replaced by rows of folding chairs, each one feeling too empty, too still. Instead of a normal living room, the place now feels like a space set apart just for memory and longing. Chris wanders through it, his footsteps echoing a little in the silence. And every year it feels like the hush is heavier, as if even the air knows what today means. Each passing year, the absence of his wife Rachel, her brother Mike, and their 5 children grows even harder to carry. He thinks about the note they left on the kitchen table all those years ago, a simple message saying they'd be back after visiting Rachel's and across the city. That note is still pinned to the fridge, yellowed now and a little brittle, but Chris can't bring himself to take it down. It is the last sign of hope he had, and the hope never did come true. 10 years have come and gone since then, but the ache inside Chris never really faded, kept alive by the same questions that haunt him every day. Neighbors from St. Mark's Church gather together, their clothes all dark and simple, everyone quietly doing their best to show respect as they sing old hymns in the living room. The songs echo off the walls. Sometimes a few voices crack, but nobody stops. As each person takes a moment to speak, sharing a quick memory or recalling a small story about Rachel, Mike, or the kids, you can feel this mix of sadness and agitation under the surface. It is almost like people are carrying a burden they cannot name. There's always been this sense floating around that something about that day never got properly dealt with. People mostly accept that they may never know, but at these gatherings, the hope that there is still more to uncover hangs in the air. When the official part of the service ends, most people head home, but a handful of closest friends and family linger behind. They move in around the old dining table, forming a quiet circle. Right in the middle are personal keepsakes, a well-worn baseball cap, a faded family photo, a pink stuffed animal from one of the girls. The note, carefully flattened and placed at the center, pulls everyone's attention. Every glance at that paper aches with loss and carries a thin thread of hope that maybe they missed something, that some small clue is still waiting to be found. Chris picks up the note, running a finger along the edge before reading Rachel's handwriting one more time. Her words are plain, almost too ordinary. Went to see some folks from church and checking on Aunt Judith. Back for dinner. Love you. Somehow, reading it today makes the message seem even stranger, as if Rachel had wanted to tell him more but held back. It has been 10 long years since that morning, yet the simple lines on the page have never stopped feeling mysterious. Sitting around the table, Chris and those closest to him start talking quietly, voices barely above a whisper. They go over the church business Rachel mentioned, asking each other what it could have meant. St. Mark's was always active with events and gatherings, but nobody ever figured out if there truly was something important that morning. The note was also vague about which relatives they had gone to visit. Aunt Judith lived clear across the south side, but even she never saw or heard from them that day. Everyone in the community had tried to help. They searched neighborhoods, checked every hospital, even called around to distant cousins. Still nothing. The mystery only grew over the years, turning into the kind of topic that nobody wanted to bring up anymore. Off to one side of the table, Andy, who has known Chris since childhood, picks up an old family photo. He holds it up, squinting to get a better look at the background. The picture shows the backyard, everyone smiling at a barbecue, but there is something odd about what is hanging from the clothesline behind them. A row of freshly washed shirts flutters in the breeze, and the sight suddenly seems strange to Andy. If they were really planning to visit folks for a few days, why would Rachel have just done the laundry? Andy wonders aloud. It feels like a simple detail that does not quite fit with what the note had said about their plans. The group cranes their necks, trying to get a closer look at what else is in the photo. That is when they notice something standing out among the plain t-shirts and towels. A bright, neon orange vest, the kind that local police officers wear when working on traffic duty or helping at community events. It is clear from the size and small patch on the shoulder that this one belonged to Officer Lewis, who everyone knew had been close with the family. Officer Lewis had always looked out for Rachel, checking in when Chris worked late shifts. The sight of the vest in the photo stirs up a fresh wave of questions, as the group tries to piece together why his vest would end up at their house just before everything changed. As Andy keeps turning the picture around, Sarah, Chris's cousin, suddenly remembers how often Officer Lewis had been around their neighborhood back then. He was the kind of guy everyone trusted, always ready to help organize the church fair, drop off groceries, or check on folks living alone. Seeing his vest in that old photo throws her back to summer afternoons on their block when Lewis would be chatting with Rachel or tossing a ball with the kids. But tonight, sitting in that living room, the question hangs in the air: what was his vest doing mixed in with the family's laundry right before they disappeared? It takes only a few moments for the unease to settle in. That vest, left unnoticed all this time, now feels almost like a message hiding in plain sight. Chris gets up and motions to the small box of stored items in the hall closet. As they dig through the box, they find birthday cards, a couple of the kids' toys, an old pair of ballet shoes, and then, neatly folded, the actual orange vest itself. They cannot help but stare at it, wondering if maybe there's some hidden clue or note tucked into a pocket, anything that could possibly explain what happened or at least point them in a new direction after 10 years of not knowing. Chris lifts the vest out of the box and turns it over in his hands. The name Lewis is stitched right above the front pocket in heavy blue thread, leaving no doubt that it belongs to Officer Lewis. For a moment, everyone just stares at it, thinking about how clean and neat it is, not a stain or speck of dirt to be found. Chris remembers how Rachel always made a point of helping neighbors, doing small mending jobs, or washing uniforms for friends who needed a little extra help. It seems likely she had washed the vest for Lewis, but the timing, right before the day she and the kids vanished, now feels impossible to ignore. A heavy silence fills the room as Chris tries to process what this could mean. He feels a strange mix of nerves, dread, and duty. Maybe handing this vest back to Officer Lewis could open a door they all missed years ago. After all, in a case where every lead had long since dried up, a single overlooked detail could matter more than anyone realized. Chris folds up the vest again, this time more carefully, and tells the group he is going to take it straight to Lewis and invite him to talk. For the first time in many years, there's a flicker of hope that something might finally change. Chris hesitates with his phone in hand, thumb hovering over Officer Lewis's number. Calling the police in his Chicago neighborhood has never been a simple affair. Folks from St. Mark's have always kept a careful balance with the cops. There is respect, but there is also space, and Chris feels that fine line whenever he thinks about reaching out. Outsiders have never really become family here, even when they wear the same uniforms. After a few seconds, Chris slips his phone back into his pocket. He decides it would feel more right to just show up at Lewis's place and talk things out face to face. That is how they always did things around here anyway. Direct, neighborly, no voicemails or emails, just a knock on the door when something truly mattered. But before heading over, Chris stops by Tom's house. Tom has lived next door since before Rachel and Chris got married. He knows the rhythms of the block better than anyone. Over 2 cups of coffee at Tom's kitchen table, old stories bubble up. Tom leans closer and shares that long before everything happened, some real estate guys had shown up sniffing around, talking about new developments and offering big money for people's houses. Rachel especially wanted nothing to do with selling. This bit of history flares up old worries for Chris, suggesting maybe all the answers do not point to the church or the police alone. As Chris walks toward the district police station, the streets seem quieter than usual, almost heavy with old secrets. He cuts through the alley behind Tom's house, thinking about their talk and still clutching the carefully folded vest in his bag. Passing by the corner lot, he spots Tom standing at his gate. Only Tom is not alone. 2 men in crisp, navy blue jackets, uniforms that do not match any he has seen before, stand a little too close, voices low. They have no name tags, and their cars are nowhere in sight. Chris can pick up just enough of the conversation to realize these men are pushing Tom hard to sell his house, which sits on the last bit of untouched property on the block. The air feels thick with tension. Chris cannot just keep walking. He steps up alongside Tom and asks the men what business they have here, making sure his words carry a tone that means he is not afraid. He stands tall, right next to Tom, showing that nobody faces this kind of pressure alone. The men exchange a look, then, with a fake smile, they say it was just a friendly suggestion and back off. Before driving away, one slips a business card into Tom's hand. No company logo, only a name, Mr. Gray, and a Chicago phone number. Both Chris and Tom know that nothing about this is friendly. The men might be gone, but the threat in their visit lingers, adding a new layer of trouble to a mystery that was already thick with questions. After the men drive off, Chris and Tom linger by the sidewalk, both unsettled but refusing to show it. Chris asks if this kind of thing has happened before, and Tom nods, his face growing serious. He explains that, right around the time Rachel and the kids went missing, there were more than a few pushy visits like today, guys in nice suits and unmarked cars showing up at inconvenient hours. They never said who they worked for, just talked about how easy life would be if only folks would rethink holding on to family houses. Sometimes the talk turned to warnings about what might happen if people said no. Chris listens, his mind racing as pieces start coming together. He recalls the old days, when Rachel firmly told anyone who came to their door that the only thing for sale here was her cookies at bake sales. Now, hearing Tom talk about how those men lingered, always watching, it dawns on Chris that they had been living with a cloud over their street for years without really noticing. Suddenly, the whole story feels different, as if the truth behind Rachel's disappearance is tangled up in something larger and much more dangerous than anyone had guessed. He feels a deep chill, knowing all too well that the past might be repeating itself. Only this time, everyone is finally paying attention. Chris walks up the gray steps of the Chicago precinct, the vest pressed close under his arm. But as soon as he asks for Officer Lewis, the desk sergeant tells him Lewis is out on field duty. They offer to take the vest, maybe stick it in an office somewhere, but Chris shakes his head, not willing to hand over something so important to someone who will just toss it in with lost property. He feels the pressure of all the recent discoveries, determined that Lewis needs to hear about the card, the threats, and the sudden return of old trouble, directly from him. With no real idea how long the wait will be, Chris steps back outside. He finds himself drawn down the cracked sidewalk to what used to be his family's old corner plot. Once a working garden and a little brick house full of voices, the place is shuttered now, vines climbing the porch rails, the windows looking out blankly over the street. He walks the edge of the fence, feeling memories crowd around him. Kids laughing on long summer evenings, the sound of Rachel's radio pouring out the back door. As he stands there, the house feels both familiar and strange, every shadow around the yard heavy with the weight of questions that have haunted him for 10 long years. As Chris stands at the edge of the old yard, arms resting on the rusted fence, a sedan rolls to a stop at the curb. The driver steps out, a man in a crisp, cheap suit who introduces himself as Ben. Ben launches right into his pitch, barely bothering with small talk. He talks about how the whole South Side is changing fast and how property values are dropping, trying to make it sound like Chris will be doing himself a favor by selling now, quick and easy, for a lot less than what similar lots went for before. Chris keeps his answers short, noticing the way Ben never asks about the house or the family, just keeps circling back to the land. Ben hands over a set of paperwork from a folder, glossy maps and letters with city seals stamped along the margins. That is when Chris's eyes catch a dark line drawn on a map, circling an old rise-out past the train tracks, a clump of overgrown trees where he and Rachel used to take walks. In every document, that spot is marked with annotations and arrows. Chris feels his neck prickle. He asks Ben what makes that patch so special, but Ben waves it off, saying developers like to be thorough. Chris feels a deep sense of suspicion. Suddenly, the more he looks at the paperwork, the more certain he is that whatever happened to his family and neighbors did not start or end at the farmhouse. Something in those woods has always been at the center of it all. Trying not to give away his growing suspicion, Chris agrees to ride with Ben over to the office, a glass tower that sticks out against the old bungalows like a sore thumb. Inside, it is all metal desks, white floors, and people in matching blazers, moving around with earbuds and clipboards. Chris spots the same type of uniforms worn by the guys who cornered Tom earlier, and it sends a shiver down his back. The place feels cold, everything too neat and too quiet, no pictures or anything personal on the walls. Ben tells Chris to wait while some last checks are done with the paperwork, then disappears with a folder under his arm. Left alone in the lobby, Chris wanders over to a scale model of the neighborhood behind a glass case. He can see little plastic trees, cars, even a plastic version of his old house. Except in the plans, his house and every other home from St. Mark's are gone, replaced by big shops and a tourist center. Only a tiny memorial park sits in one corner, a stone, a plaque, something that looks like an afterthought. Seeing this, Chris feels anger simmer under his skin. The model makes it clear. They want to wipe away everything, houses and people and memories alike, and pretend a plaque is enough to take the place of a community. Chris cannot shake a growing sense of dread, even as he pretends to study the maps and fake friendly pamphlets spread out on the lobby table. Out of the corner of his eye, through the wide office windows, he spots that same black pickup from earlier, the one the uniformed men had driven, rattling its way up the narrow road toward the old ridge marked on the documents. Right behind it, though half hidden by dusty trees, he catches a glimpse of a city cruiser. He would know that shape anywhere. Officer Lewis must be trailing them, careful not to be seen. That sinking feeling in Chris's gut turns to urgency. He knows he cannot just stand here while something shady goes down where no one else can see. Pushing past the startled receptionist who asks if he is leaving before the meeting's finished, Chris mumbles an excuse about an emergency and bolts out the door. He dashes to his car, hands a little shaky, and pulls onto the winding road that snakes around the mountain. The climb is rough and lonely, with trees crowding tight over the pavement and the last bits of sunlight slanting through the branches. Every turn in the road seems to press him closer to secrets he has been afraid to face for years. The fear rides with him, but it pushes him forward. He will not let people disappear, houses vanish, and history be bulldozed without at least getting the truth. Reaching the summit, Chris parks his car off the side of the dusty road and moves quietly toward a fenced-off construction site. The project sprawls across the plateau, fake old-fashioned trim slapped onto a hulking concrete shell that looks nothing like the homes he grew up with. He sees signs with logos from the company whose office he just left, all boasting about revitalizing local culture. There's hardly anyone around except a few guys in hard hats, and those same clean-shaven men from before. Chris ducks behind a pile of lumber, close enough to catch more than bits of voices. Standing a few steps away, Officer Lewis is talking to the men, uneasy with how at ease they are in this strange place. Chris listens as one of them laughs about how visitors will love ghost tours and reenactments, how people will pay a fortune just to hear about the tragic vanishing of St. Mark's community. The men brag about how the whole project rests on the mystery. Never mind that real families and lives were swept aside to tell it. They toss out words like legacy and progress, but it is clear none of them care about anyone who actually lived on this land. Chris feels a knot of anger and sadness growing, realizing just how cheap his history has become to the people in charge. As Chris waits in the shadows, his heart pounding, he suddenly sees the tone of the conversation shift. One of the men, clearly in charge, calls over a worker and points firmly at a spot on the ground marked off by spray paint and flags. The worker nods, grabs a shovel, and starts digging without hesitation, his face a mask of indifference. Before long, the shovel hits something solid. There is a sickening pause, and then the worker pulls up a cluster of bones, too many to belong to any animal. With no ceremony, the bones are handed off to Officer Lewis, who stands there holding them as if they mean nothing more than scrap wood. Chris feels numb, barely able to breathe. He finally understands the depth of what happened on this mountain. Everything becomes painfully clear. The missing families, the rumors, the officials looking the other way. It all ties back to this place, this project, and the people behind it. He listens as the men talk without shame about getting rid of anyone who causes trouble, even bragging about having police like Lewis on their payroll to smooth over any issues. Chris feels a cold fury rise. There is no more doubt. The truth is ugly, and the cost has always been people like his family, easily swept aside for profit and the lies they plan to sell. Staggering back from the scene, Chris keeps himself hidden as best he can. He peels off the dusty work jacket he had thrown on to blend in with the construction crew, tossing it aside without caring where it lands. His hands shake as he digs out his phone. Ducking behind his car, heart racing, he dials 911 and tries to keep his voice steady. He tells the dispatcher everything about the bones, the threats, and most important, that Officer Lewis is involved along with the men behind the building project. He makes sure to say that it is not just local trouble, but real corruption, and that the state police need to come fast. Those next few minutes feel like hours. Chris keeps his eyes fixed on the winding dirt trail up the mountain, half expecting someone to come after him or spot his car. He flinches every time a twig snaps in the woods. But finally, he hears sirens, first in the distance, then growing louder. Chris stays low as state police cars, lights flashing, pull up beside the construction zone. Everything happens at once. Lewis tries to act like he is still in charge, barking orders, but he is quickly pushed aside, cuffed, and led away by troopers. The developers make a break for their vehicles, but they do not get far before they are caught, their plan finally falling apart. When the police finally secure the scene, they waste no time in searching the area around the construction site. Chris stands nearby, nervous and jittery, watching as investigators work under the harsh light of flashlights and camera flashes. It does not take long before someone lets out a low shout. They have found more remains. Before the night is over, they recover pieces of clothing and old photographs, the sort of personal items only someone from the missing family would know. One detective gently places a weathered wallet into an evidence bag, the initials on the leather confirming what Chris feared. Relief washes over him for just a second. They're finally going to stop pretending, finally give those families their truth. But it also stings all over again, reopening grief that he had managed to bury for years. The sight of Officer Lewis in handcuffs feels surreal, almost dreamlike. The developers are rounded up and read their rights, heads down as they are led to the waiting cars. After the chaos settles, an officer calls Chris over and asks if he will come to the station. He nods, already exhausted but understanding how much this matters. In the interrogation room, Chris tells everything, from the very first warning signs to what he overheard by the construction site. It is a heavy burden, but Chris knows that if he does not speak up, the full truth will not survive. Sitting under the buzzing lights of the interview room, Chris tells the detectives about what he remembers from 10 years ago, when Officer Lewis first led that so-called investigation. He describes how Lewis seemed more focused on paperwork and technicalities than on actually talking to people or finding out the truth. Chris points out how Lewis would show up at homes, jot a few notes, then disappear, never really following up. He says straight out that it always felt like Lewis did not want to solve anything. Looking back, Chris can now see how the missing details and the unasked questions made it easy for everything to be swept under the rug. The officers listening to Chris nod and share that they have made an important discovery. They managed to get into the back office of Heritage Rebuilders, the company running the construction site, and there they found an old notebook. As one detective shows Chris a few photocopied pages, he realizes it is a diary, pages filled with notes about meetings and deals. It even has Lewis's name and details about making problems disappear. The betrayal hits hard. Lewis had been the one everyone trusted, especially in a small mountain town where neighbors rarely went to the authorities except as a last resort. And here was proof that Lewis used this trust to hurt the very people he was supposed to protect, all for money and favors. It is a truth that does not sit easy with anyone in the room. Days pass, and the news spreads through Fletcher, the small Colorado town Chris calls home. DNA results finally come back, and the officers confirm the bones belong to the missing family everyone had quietly mourned for so long, Chris's relatives. When the detective calls his mother, Mary, she does not say much, just tells Chris she needs him at the station. They sit together in a quiet room, faces drawn, as the officer lays out a collection of old keepsakes, a faded scarf, a silver locket, even a tiny carved elk that belonged to Chris's cousin. Mary's hands shake when she touches each item, and Chris can tell she is reliving every holiday, every visit that just stopped without warning. For years, Part of them hoped the truth would be different, maybe even that their family was still out there, just lost. Now, the weight of reality settles in. There is relief. The uncertainty, those restless nights, are finally over. But the pain feels new again, stronger now that there is nothing left to search for. Chris hugs his mom and tries to keep steady. They talk quietly about a proper burial and making sure the story of what happened is told the right way. It is not closure, really, but it is something like hope beginning to return. After the day at the station, Chris and Mary drive home in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. That evening, Chris sits with his mom at the kitchen table, the house a little quieter than usual. He reaches for her hand and promises that their family will have the burial they deserve. He tells Mary that they will be laid to rest out at Hillcrest Cemetery, where generations of neighbors and friends have been remembered. No developer or outsider will ever change that. Mary nods, wiping away tears, grateful not only for her son's promise, but for finally having an answer, even if it hurts. A week later, the whole town comes together for a memorial service. Everyone gathers at the little church that looks out over the valley, the pews filled with people who still remember the missing by name. There are prayers, a few stories, and quiet moments as Chris helps carry the wooden box out to the old oak tree by the cemetery's edge. He realizes the family legacy is much more than buildings or money. These stories, these memories belong to the people who kept looking when it would have been easier to forget. As the community stands shoulder to shoulder, Chris feels the cycle of pain and secrecy ending at last, replaced by a fragile, honest hope.